Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Abigail Boucher, and I'm a lecturer in English literature at Aston University. And today I'd like to walk you through a bit of really fun theory that we cover in our first year literature and film module. And this is called the Panopticon. Now, the Panopticon is just one particular theory under the sort of broader remit of something called gaze theory, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the different theories and ways of reading texts and films and the world around us. By using issues surrounding vision, sort of interrogating who can see what and what do we even understand sight to be. So unsurprisingly, this is a very visual type of theory, so it works really, really well in film. It's very easy to apply, although it does extend, obviously, far beyond the remit of just film. Now, there are a lot of different types of gaze theory, so we're just going to focus purely on the Panopticon today to keep things simple. So weirdly enough, the Panopticon was actually an architectural concept for prison reform, if you can believe it. And this was put forth in 1791 by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. So this is kind of a weird thing to connect to literature and film studies, but the overlap will be made apparent in a minute. Now, what Bentham proposed was that we should sort of design prisons like this to maximize their efficiency. So the building he proposed for called for a circular ring of cells that surround a watchtower. And the inward-facing wall of this cells, the wall that faces the watchtower, should be replaced with something like glass or with bars that enable the guards in the watchtower to see the prisoners at all times. Right, so there's no privacy here. However, the important thing is that the windows in the watchtower are constructed in such a way that the guards can see the prisoners, but the prisoners can never look in and see the guards. So the prisoners are always aware that they could be watched at any given moment, but they're never precisely sure when. This is actually kind of a faulty version of the Panopticon because we can see right in the watchtower, but assume that we couldn't. Assume that this was constructed in such a way that we weren't sure if the guard was ever actually looking at us. And the reason that they do this, what Bentham thought would happen, is that if prisoners thought they were always being watched or could always be watched, they would behave and police themselves so they wouldn't risk getting in trouble. So with this design, you could theoretically have a single guard maintain control over thousands of prisoners, or even no guard at all. The whole point is that the prisoners don't know if there's 100 people in there or none. So here's where literature comes into it. So in 1975, the French theorist Michel Foucault wrote a book called Discipline and Punish. And this builds off of Bentham's design. So he is working specifically from Bentham's architectural reform. But here, Foucault transforms architecture into literary theory. So Foucault argues that the crux of his argument, and of Bentham's entire theory really, lies in just one short principle, and that's visibility is a trap. He says, so to arrange things that the surveillance is permanent in its effects, even if it is discontinuous in its action, that the perfection of power should tend to render its actual exercise unnecessary. So in short, what he's saying is, once you've conditioned people to believe that they're always being watched, whether they actually are being watched or not, they're just going to stop transgressing for fear of being caught and punished. Now, there are dozens, maybe hundreds of texts written on this premise, and probably millions that could be read under this lens. And a few sort of more overt examples are things like 1984, Animal Farm, The Handmaid's Tale, The Crucible, and also most social dramas like Anna Karenina, The Age of Innocence, and The Scarlet Letter. And if we think about this, if we extend this in a slightly different direction, a lot of detective fiction like Sherlock Holmes and Poirot, because their power and their ability to stop crime lies in their keen skills of observation, in being able to see what other people cannot. There's a huge focus on the gaze that they have there and the clues that they plant that we might, as a reader, feel like maybe I've seen something, there's something weird going on with this, this teacup or this letter or what have you, but you don't quite know what. Our gaze is limited by the narration. We can't see what they can see. And if you think about it, I mean, the Panopticon, or this idea of the gaze, has a huge significant application in real life. I mean, there's There's CCTV everywhere. Street lamps vastly reduce crime. So there was a saying in the Victorian era when they had started putting up street lamps everywhere that one street lamp was equal to 2 policemen. We also sort of we monitor people via their social media, whether that's people you know or celebrities. So, I mean, there are whole Twitter feeds and publications and, push alerts about, this celebrity has been seen here, write in and see where they go next and what they buy and what they do. And it comes down, I mean, to a lesser extent, but you can still apply this slightly to how we dress and how we sort of perform in public. So we acknowledge that because people look at us and can see us, we know this. We unconsciously respond by saying, I am going to do this, wear this, behave like this, to either conform to certain standards that you have, and be, hopefully garner some sort of response from you, or I'm going to push back and break some boundaries and court another response. So rather than speaking abstractly, I wanted to show you a few clips from films that you might not have realized engaged quite so heavily with concepts of vision and the gaze. So as I said, appropriately, this works really well in films, so filmmakers tend to use this a lot. So just to keep an eye out for it, this really is everywhere. Now, all of these films I'm about to show you really conform to Foucault's theory, especially in that they equate vision with power and a lack of vision, or in fact just being seen, with a lack of power.
So, you won't take warning, eh? All the worse for you, then. I'll take care of you now instead of later. Ah!
Pippin! Steady on!
Why don't you come in and we'll talk about it?
Bored?
Get some rest, Pam. You look tired.
So let's do a little bit by way of some close readings of one film in particular. So we've looked at a few quite broadly, but I want to talk about the film that we study in our first year module, Literature and Film, and that's Alfred Hitchcock's 1954 thriller, Rear Window. So if you haven't seen this, it is a real treat. I recommend you stop what you're doing after this and immediately go put it on, because this is a very, very well-made, very entertaining film. So the premise of the film is that our main character, Jeff, here played by Jimmy Stewart, is he's a photographer. He's stuck at home with a broken leg, and he alleviates his boredom and his sort of sense of immobility by doing a little good-natured snooping on his neighbors. It starts out really, really innocently with him just playing around with his camera, playing around with his binoculars, and sort of looking into other people's windows. And this is all, all fun and games until he thinks that he's stumbled across a murder across the way. He thinks the guy in the apartment across from him has murdered his wife. So the whole premise of this film is us trying to figure out if Jeff is right, if he's maybe just bored and reading too much into an innocent man's behavior, or if he's gone mad. So Hitchcock's camera work in this movie is wonderful because the camera not only operates like a giant eye, so you should always sort of think of the camera in terms of that sort of vision and gaze and who can see what, but it specifically acts as Jeff's eyes. So if we look at this opening sequence, the camera work here is mimicking Jeff's mobility and his vision, his visibility, right? So we don't see him, but it sees everything else. So it really is sort of a point of view shot that puts us in line with Jeff. This is a way for the audience to come to grips with the environment and all these different apartments and help us piece together who's who. And the camera is panning around all over the place, mimicking Jeff's sort of nosy neighbor gaze. But it's really important to note that the camera actually stays rooted to one spot, even as it's looking around. So this mimics Jeff's lack of mobility. It makes the audience feel close to Jeff and feel just as frustrated that he is, because it's almost like we're stuck in his body here, where we're looking around, but we're not actually moving around. Additionally, Alfred Hitchcock makes sure that the camera work here is not omniscient. So we as the audience, this is really fun. We never see anything that Jeff cannot see from his apartment. We don't get to properly go inside anyone else's apartment, apart from what Jeff can see through their windows from a distance. When other characters leave Jeff's flat, we do not get to follow them. When they're sort of out of his range, he's not able to speak to them or see them anymore, we can't see them either. When Jeff falls asleep, the camera fades to black. So we can only witness what he's witnessing. And that's kind of frustrating for the viewer as well, because we want to solve this mystery as much as Jeff does. But our gaze is bound to this fallible man. He has to sleep sometimes. He can't look everywhere at once. He's only human. What's also really fun is that when Jeff wants to get a closer look at anything, we can only see it, again, that closer view, through his binoculars. So a good part of the screen here, as we can see, is blacked out to mimic that. We can see closer, and that's sort of powerful, but it also does cut off a huge chunk of our gaze. It makes it harder for us to look around elsewhere. Now, this is really neat in terms of pairing it with the Panopticon, because here, while visibility is to some extent a trap in that, Jeff can see other people, but they don't really see him. He usually does this in the dark, or sort of hidden behind things. The gaze also leads to a certain amount of uncertainty here when it's employed outside of the specific prison Panopticon. Jeff is only one man. He's not some whole institution, and his gaze is limited because of that. And importantly, he's sort of this imperfect panopticon because the people across the way don't actually know that they're being watched, so they don't modify their behavior. This is a really fun way to show how the gaze can work and attempt to maintain order and law here, but without this very structural, important factor that people know they're being watched and that, the person watching them has the power to punish them. Behavior doesn't change. Now, it's really difficult not to talk about this film in more depth because I really don't want to spoil any of the plot. So it's worth checking out yourself. And this is only a very abbreviated version of the Panopticon as a theory, but hopefully it's something fun that you've learned a little bit about today. And I just really hope you can take this forward and apply this to your own film watching. So right at this point, I am happy to take any questions if you have them. Thank you.